The first time I understood how small my wife had learned to make me look, we were standing under a chandelier paid for by men who liked their names on buildings. It was a redevelopment fundraiser in downtown Atlanta, one of those polished rooms where everyone smiled like they were already negotiating and laughed like they had practiced the sound in the mirror. My wife, Tasha, moved through that room like she had been waiting all year to be seen in it. She wore a cream-colored dress with gold earrings I had never seen before, and every time someone asked what she did, her voice lifted just a little, like the answer needed a stage. I stood beside her in a dark suit, quiet, watching hands, eyes, pauses, the things people say before they know they are saying them. That was always how I learned a room. Tasha used to say she loved that about me, that I could read people without needing to dominate them. Somewhere along the way, she had started saying it differently, like silence was a flaw she had been patient enough to tolerate. Grant Ellis arrived 20 minutes after we did, and the room shifted toward him before he even reached the bar. He was tall, clean-shaven, expensive in that deliberate way some men are, the kind of man who wore a watch loud enough to introduce itself before he did. People moved around him with that soft hunger reserved for developers, donors, and men rumored to be close to the mayor's office. Tasha saw him before I did. I noticed because her shoulders changed. Not much, just enough for a husband to catch it if he still knew the woman beside him. She touched her hair once, smoothed the front of her dress, and gave him the kind of smile she had not given me across our own kitchen table in months. Grant crossed over like he had every right to expect her attention, and when he said her name, he did not say it like a man meeting a business contact. He said it like a man returning to a conversation already in progress. Tasha introduced us with one hand resting lightly against my arm, but even that felt like presentation instead of affection. "This is my husband, Malcolm," she said, and then she paused in a way that gave her time to choose the smaller version of me. "He handles properties, maintenance, repairs, that kind of thing." I looked at her face when she said it. No hesitation, no embarrassment, no correction waiting behind her eyes. Grant smiled and gave me a handshake with just enough pressure to tell me he had decided who I was before my hand touched his. "Nothing wrong with keeping buildings standing," he said, glancing toward the crowd behind him. "Some of us just prefer building what changes the skyline." Tasha laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly enough for anyone else to notice, but comfortably. That was the part that stayed with me. A joke can be forgiven when someone is surprised into it, but comfort tells the truth. I did not correct either of them. I did not say that I had spent 15 years learning which empty lots would become valuable before men like Grant knew how to pronounce the neighborhood names. I did not say that the Harbor Yard project he was being praised for that night sat on land tied to a company I controlled through Bennett Harbor Holdings. I did not say that half the men circling him with congratulations had already called my attorney's office, my finance team, or my project manager without ever knowing my name. There is a certain kind of man who needs power to enter the room ahead of him. I was raised different. My grandfather used to tell me, if a man has to keep telling you what he owns, check the paperwork. So I stood there, smiled politely, and let Grant Ellis enjoy being tall in a room where he did not know the floor beneath him had already been measured by me. For the next hour, I watched Tasha become lighter around him. She leaned in when he spoke. She touched his sleeve once, while pretending to emphasize a point. She laughed at stories about zoning fights and investor dinners, stories that would have bored her if I had told them from the other side of the table. Whenever I came close, she shifted the conversation back to safe ground, made me sound useful, reliable, ordinary. That was the word I could feel without anyone saying it. Ordinary. A husband who fixed leaks, signed checks, changed furnace filters, and waited at home while she stepped into rooms where important men talked about the future. I had loved her for 12 years, and because I loved her, I had allowed her not to understand every corner of my business. That night, I began to realize she had mistaken privacy for emptiness. When we finally left, the valet line was backed up under the hotel awning, and Tasha stood a few feet away from me, typing with both thumbs. Her face had that guarded brightness people get when they are trying not to smile at their phone in public. I did not reach for it. I did not ask who had her attention. I simply stepped beside her as the valet called another name, and the screen tilted toward me for less than a second. It was enough. Grant's name sat at the top of the message thread, and beneath it, One line glowed bright against the glass. "After the closing dinner, we won't have to keep pretending." Tasha locked the phone so fast most men might have questioned what they saw. I did not. I opened the passenger door for her, watched her slide into the seat like nothing in the world had changed, and understood that the fundraiser had not been the beginning of something. It had been the first time she let me see the edge of what was already there. The drive home was quiet in the way a car gets quiet when two people are both pretending nothing happened. Tasha looked out the passenger window most of the way, her phone face down in her lap, one hand resting over it like she was guarding a small fire. Atlanta moved past us in glass and headlights, hotel entrances, valet stands, cranes dark against the night sky, all the polished proof that somebody was always building something and somebody else was always trying to be seen near it. I kept both hands on the wheel and said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Silence can make guilty people talk if they think you are too calm for the moment. But Tasha did not talk. She just cleared her throat once and said the fundraiser had been useful, that Grant knew everybody, that people like him were connected in ways you can't really buy. She said it like a compliment, but it landed like a comparison. At home, she became casual too quickly. That was the first thing I noticed. She kicked off her heels by the door, walked into the kitchen, poured herself water, and started telling me about some woman from the city planning committee, as if the last thing I had seen on her phone did not exist. I leaned against the counter and let her perform normal. Then I asked, "How long have you known Grant Ellis?" Not loud, not sharp, just a husband asking a question he had earned the right to ask. Tasha did not look at me right away. She took one more sip of water, set the glass down carefully, and said, "Not long. He's just someone I've crossed paths with through client work." Then she gave me a tired little smile and added, "Please don't make networking weird, Malcolm." That was when I knew she had already prepared a box to put me in. Jealous, insecure, small, a man uncomfortable around bigger men. I went upstairs before she did. I took off my jacket, hung it properly, and stood in the closet for a moment with my hands still on the hanger. I was angry, but anger was too easy. Anger wanted to kick doors open and demand explanations from a woman already building escape routes. I had spent most of my adult life in construction, then property, then finance, and the first lesson the work taught me was that you never swing at a wall before you know what is behind it. You check the studs, you check the wiring, you find the load-bearing points. That night, my marriage started looking less like a home and more like a structure with hidden damage. So I washed my face, brushed my teeth, and got into bed beside a woman who placed her phone under her pillow instead of on the nightstand where it had always been. I did not sleep much. At 4:36 inches the morning, I got up without turning on the bedroom light and went downstairs. The house had that dead early-hour stillness where every sound tells on you, the refrigerator humming, the vents clicking, my bare feet against the hardwood. I made coffee and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. I did not touch Tasha's phone, did not guess passwords, did not do anything I would have to explain later to a judge or to myself. I opened my own calendar. I opened the project calendar for Harbor Yard. Then I opened the private milestone schedule Renee Whitaker's office had sent me 2 weeks earlier, the one Grant Ellis would never have seen unless someone close to me had been careless or disloyal. Harbor Yard had a financing review coming up in 9 days. After that came the closing dinner Grant had mentioned in his message. I stared at the dates until they stopped being dates and started becoming a pattern. Tasha's late nights had changed about 5 months earlier. At first, it was client onboarding, then women's leadership dinner, then brand strategy for a development group. I had accepted those explanations because I had wanted to respect the woman I married, and because I knew what it meant to build something that demanded strange hours. But now I placed her calendar beside Grant's project milestones, and the overlap was too clean to ignore. The nights she came home smelling faintly of hotel lobby perfume matched investor briefings. The weekends, she said she needed space to think matched private development tours. One Thursday she had told me she was helping a nonprofit prepare remarks for a gala. That same Thursday, Grant's team had submitted a revised request connected to Parcel C, the one piece of Harbor Yard they could not move without Bennett Harbor Holdings approving it. My company, my land, my signature. By sunrise, I was no longer asking myself whether my wife was lying. I was asking what her lies were touching. There is a difference. A personal betrayal can break your heart, but a business betrayal can put knives in places you do not feel until you move. I sent one message to my operations manager asking for a clean export of all visitor logs connected to the temporary Harbor Yard project office. I gave no explanation. I did not need to. By 7:12, the file was in my inbox. I poured a second cup of coffee, opened the spreadsheet, and searched Tasha's name first. Nothing came up. Then I searched her consulting firm. 2 entries, both after hours. Both approved through a private access code assigned to Grant Ellis's office suite. Both on nights she had told me she was at women's leadership dinners. The project office she was never supposed to enter sat on the 4th floor of a converted warehouse near the old rail line, not far from where Harbor Yard would eventually rise. From the street, it looked temporary because it was supposed to. Folding tables, rolled site plans, permit boards, coffee-stained floor samples, and a glass conference room where men like Grant could point at renderings and make investors feel like concrete had already turned into profit. I had been there twice in 6 months, both times after hours, both times through the service entrance, because my name was not the one Grant used when he talked about the future. Bennett Harbor Holdings was listed in the documents, not Malcolm Bennett. That separation had protected me for years. That morning, it became the reason I could look at the visitor log and see the truth before anyone knew I was looking. The first entry with Tasha's consulting firm was a Tuesday at 8:14 p.m. She had told me she was at a leadership dinner for black women in executive branding, and I remembered that because I had offered to pick her up if the event ran late. She told me not to bother. The second entry was 3 weeks later at 9:02 p.m. The same night she came home carrying a shopping bag and said the dinner had included gift boxes from sponsors. I remembered smiling at that, because I had been glad something in her work made her feel appreciated. Now I sat at my kitchen table with the coffee cooling beside me and understood that appreciation had not come from a sponsor. It had come from a man, using a private access code to bring my wife into a project office tied to my own land. The insult was personal, but the placement of it was business. That made it colder. I kept going. Parking records showed a vehicle matching Tasha's plate entering the deck across from the project office on 4 additional nights, all between 7 and 10. 2 of those nights lined up with revised internal communications from Grant's team. One was about Parcel C, another was about the bridge financing extension. Those were not phrases Tasha would have understood on her own, not because she was unintelligent, but because that was not her field. She knew branding, rooms, social pressure, the soft side of power. She did not know land control clauses or financing triggers unless somebody explained them, and there were only a few places she could have heard those terms used casually. One of them was my kitchen, where I had trusted my wife enough to speak freely after long days. I thought back to all the nights she had asked questions that sounded like interest. So what happens if they miss that date? Who actually approves the next phase? Can Grant's group move without the parcel? I had answered because a husband wants to believe curiosity is love before he believes it is intelligence gathering. By mid-morning, I had 3 screens open. On one, the visitor log. On another, project emails from Grant's side, routed through official channels. On the third, my own notes from meetings with Renee and the finance team. I was not looking for romance anymore. I was looking for transfer points, the places where something I said at home appeared later in Grant's pressure campaign. The first one was subtle. After I told Tasha in August that Bennett Harbor would not approve a premature financing extension without new guarantees, Grant's lawyer sent a letter 3 days later trying to frame the delay as unreasonable interference. The second one was harder to excuse. After I mentioned privately that one of our investor partners wanted the East Retail Corridor redesigned, Grant's team suddenly pushed a public relations angle around community access to make our concerns look obstructive. The third one took the air out of the room. I had told Tasha, and only Tasha, that Renee believed Grant was over-leveraged on 2 side projects. 10 days later, Grant's people tried to force approval before their next lender review, like they knew time was their enemy. I stood up from the table then, not because I needed to move, but because sitting still had started to feel like letting the facts press me into the chair. The house was quiet. Upstairs, Tasha was still sleeping, or pretending to. I looked around the kitchen we had chosen together. The marble counters, she said, made the room feel successful. The pendant lights she picked because they photographed well. The breakfast nook, where she used to sit barefoot on Sunday mornings with coffee and talk to me like I was the safest place in her world. I had built a life that gave her room to be soft, ambitious, tired, proud, uncertain, all of it. Somewhere along the way, she had decided my quiet made me usable. Not just as a husband she could leave, but as a man whose information she could carry to somebody else's table. At 9:31, I called Renee Whitaker. She answered on the third ring, calm as always, no wasted greeting. Renee had been my attorney for 11 years, long enough to know when my voice carried trouble and when it carried a decision. I told her I needed a full review of the harbor yard agreements, my marital asset file, and every communication where Grant Ellis's name appeared within reach of my holdings. She did not interrupt me. When I finished, she asked one question. Is this personal, business, or both? I looked at the visitor log on my laptop, at the 2 after-hours entries attached to my wife's consulting firm, and I felt the last soft excuse I had been holding for Tasha finally leave my body. Both, I said. Renee was quiet for half a second. Then her voice sharpened into work. Then say nothing to her, sign nothing, forward me everything, and do not let Grant know you understand the room better than he does. I hung up and sat back down. Upstairs, I heard water run through the pipes. Tasha was awake now. In a few minutes, she would come downstairs, maybe kiss my cheek, maybe complain about being tired, maybe ask why I looked so serious. And I would let her think the same thing she had thought for months, that I was just a quiet husband with calloused hands and limited reach, a man she could outgrow before breakfast. But before she reached the kitchen, I sent Renee one final message. Pull the harbor yard control documents first. Her reply came back almost immediately. Already doing it. Tasha came downstairs 12 minutes later, wearing my old Morehouse sweatshirt, the one she used to steal on cold mornings back when that kind of thing still felt like intimacy instead of costume. She paused at the bottom of the stairs when she saw me at the kitchen table, but only for a second. People who lie for a long time learn how to keep moving. She walked to the coffee maker, poured herself half a cup, and asked if I had slept. I told her not much. She made a soft sound like sympathy, but her eyes moved to my laptop before they returned to my face. The screen was already closed. I had learned a long time ago that the easiest way to make careless people comfortable is to give them nothing obvious to react to. For the next 5 days, I let the house keep pretending. I took out the trash. I answered ordinary questions. I asked if she needed anything from the store. I watched her relax into the version of me she understood, dependable, quiet, useful, too controlled to become dangerous. That was the part that cut deeper than the affair itself. She was not afraid of hurting me because she had decided hurt was where my power ended. A louder man might have thrown accusations across the kitchen and given her the advantage of knowing exactly what he knew. I had spent my life around contracts, job sites, lenders, and men with expensive shoes trying to talk numbers they did not fully understand. The first person who panics usually becomes the person who signs something bad. I was not going to panic in my own marriage. Renee and I spoke every morning before 7. She had already pulled the original harbor yard agreements, the side letters, the land control documents, and the financing approvals tied to Bennett Harbor Holdings. On paper, Grant Ellis was the face of the project. His company handled branding, investor presentations, municipal relationships, and the kind of glossy announcements that made people feel like progress had a name. But the land beneath the central phase belonged to an entity I controlled. The bridge financing that kept his timeline alive ran through a structure I had approval rights over. Any major change to the project, any attempt to shift control, any revised terms that touched Parcel C, needed my signature or Renee's authorization on my behalf. Grant could stand on stages and talk about vision. I owned the choke points. Renee also reviewed my marital file, and that conversation was colder than I expected. Most of my holdings had been established before Tasha and I married or kept separate with clean documentation afterward. The house was marital. Some accounts were marital. A few investments had shared exposure. But Bennett Harbor Holdings, the land options, and the key project rights had been built through protected structures. Tasha never bothered to understand. because she had never believed the boring paperwork could be worth more than the shiny man holding a microphone at a fundraiser. Renee warned me not to underestimate her, though. She may not know what you own, she said, but she knows enough to repeat what she hears. And if Grant used that information to pressure your position, we document it now, not later. So I sent everything. Calendar screenshots, visitor logs, email timing, notes from private conversations that appeared later in Grant's tactics. I did not embellish. Truth is stronger when you do not decorate it. At home, Tasha grew bolder because my silence looked like ignorance to her. One evening, while I was rinsing a plate at the sink, she stood behind me and said she felt like we had been standing still for years. I turned off the water and let her keep going. She talked about ambition, about rooms I did not care to enter, about how some people knew how to move when opportunity opened. She never said Grant's name, but she did not have to. He was in the shape of every sentence. Then she said, almost gently, that there were men who could see the city becoming something bigger, and men who were content fixing what other people already owned. I dried the plate slowly and placed it in the cabinet. My hands did not shake. That surprised me less than it would have years ago. What Tasha never understood was that I had started as the man fixing what other people owned. I had walked half-built floors with a clipboard, estimating costs for developers who treated labor like background noise. I learned where they wasted money, where they hid risk, where they pretended not to need the same workers they looked down on. Then I started buying what they overlooked: narrow lots, ugly warehouses, parcels with bad fencing, and good zoning futures. I did not need cameras or magazine covers. I needed patience, clean paperwork, and the discipline not to explain every move to people who only respected noise. By the time Grant Ellis learned how to sell a skyline, I had already learned how to own the dirt underneath one. On Thursday night, Tasha stood in our bedroom doorway with her arms folded and said she thought we should consider a trial separation. She delivered it carefully, like a woman making a painful but mature decision, except I could hear the timing inside it. Grant's financing announcement was less than a week away. If she could separate before then, she could control the story, step into his public victory clean, and make me look like the husband left behind. I looked at her for a long moment and nodded once. She mistook that nod for defeat. I let her. That night, after she closed the bedroom door, I called Renee and said, "File first." The private harbor yard reception was held on the top floor of a renovated bank building that still had old marble columns in the lobby and new money in every corner above it. Tasha told me I should come because it would be good for appearances, which was the kind of phrase people use when honesty would make them sound worse. She did not know Renee had already drafted the divorce petition. She did not know I had reviewed every protected holding twice. She did not know Grant's revised financing request was sitting on my attorney's desk with a red mark beside 3 clauses he had no right to touch. To her, I was still the husband being managed, the quiet man she could move around like furniture while she prepared her exit. So I put on a charcoal suit, picked her up on time, and drove her to a room where she believed another man was about to prove she had chosen correctly. Grant was in his element that night. He stood near a scale model of Harbor Yard, under warm track lighting, one hand in his pocket, the other moving smoothly over miniature towers, courtyards, retail corridors, and rooftop terraces. Investors leaned in when he spoke. City people smiled for photos beside him. He talked about legacy, neighborhood transformation, responsible growth, all the language men use when they want a profit margin to sound like a public service. Tasha stood near him with a glass of champagne she barely touched, bright-eyed and proud in a way that made something inside me go quiet. She looked at him like he was the future. She looked at me like I was the past she had not yet packed away. I watched Grant point toward the center of the model and say the East Corridor would become the heart of the project. He said it with confidence, almost affection, like a father describing a child. I looked at the tiny plastic buildings and thought about the real parcel beneath them, the survey maps, the ownership documents, the long chain of signatures that did not end at his desk. Parcel C was not his heart, it was mine. Without that land, his pretty model became a promise with a hole in the middle. Without the bridge financing I controlled, his timeline slipped. Without my approval, his revised terms were just expensive paper. The strangest part was not that he did not know. The strangest part was watching Tasha admire him for standing on something he did not own. At one point, Grant called Tasha over to meet a pair of investors from Charlotte. He introduced her as one of the sharpest image minds in the city, and she smiled like the title warmed her from the inside. Then his hand settled lightly at the small of her back. It was quick, practiced, easy to miss if you were not the husband standing 10 feet away with 12 years of memory in your chest. Tasha did not move away. She leaned into the introduction, laughing at the right places, giving the right polished remarks about community trust and public perception. I saw the life she imagined. Her beside him at openings, galas, ribbon cuttings, her face in photographs attached to buildings she believed represented a higher class of man. She did not want only love from Grant. She wanted to be seen choosing him. Later, she found me near the window, overlooking the rail corridor. The city lights stretched out below us, cranes blinking red in the distance. Traffic sliding through downtown, like slow sparks. She stood beside me without touching me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "You see what I mean now?" I turned my head slightly. She kept her eyes on the room behind us, on Grant holding court near the model. Some people build things that change everything, Malcolm. They don't just maintain what already exists. Her voice was soft enough that nobody else could hear it, but there was no softness in the meaning. Grant is building something real, something people will remember. And you? She stopped, like she wanted me to help her be kinder than she felt. I did not. Finally, she looked at me and said, "You spent your life repairing what real men own." There are sentences that end a marriage even before the paperwork does. Not because they are the worst thing a person can say, but because they reveal how long the person has been rehearsing contempt in private. I looked at my wife, at the woman I had carried through grief, celebrated through promotions, protected through seasons when she did not know what she wanted from herself. I thought about every quiet morning I had chosen patience. Every late night I had come home tired and still asked about her day. Every time I let her think, not explaining myself, meant there was nothing to explain. And standing in that room, with Grant's model glowing behind her and my land sitting under his dream, I felt the last part of me that wanted an apology finally step back. I left the reception before the speeches. Tasha did not follow. She texted me 20 minutes later, asking why I was being dramatic, and I read it in the parking garage without answering. Then I called Renee from the driver's seat. She did not ask if I was sure. She had known me too long for that. I told her to file in the morning and to schedule the Harbor Yard control meeting before Grant's financing announcement. Renee said, "I'll move both." I sat there for another minute after the call ended, listening to the low hum of the garage lights above me, and for the first time in days, my chest felt clear. The next morning, Tasha came downstairs expecting coffee, control, and one more day of me not knowing enough. The divorce papers were already on the kitchen counter. Tasha stopped halfway into the kitchen when she saw the envelope. She had come downstairs in a silk robe, phone in one hand, already wearing the face of a woman preparing to move through another normal morning. The coffee was made, because I had made it. Her mug was on the counter, because I had set it there. And beside it sat the petition with her full legal name printed across the first page, clean and final in a way no argument could soften. She looked at the papers, then at me. And for the first time in weeks, I saw her without performance. Not guilt exactly. Not even fear yet. More like offense. As if I had stepped into a role she believed belonged to her. She picked up the envelope but did not open it right away. "What is this?" she asked, though we both knew she could read. I stood at the far side of the kitchen island with my hands around my coffee cup and said, "Renee filed this morning." The room went still around those words. Tasha's eyes moved once toward the hallway, like some part of her wanted distance before the meaning reached her. Then she gave me the softer version of herself, the one that used to work when our arguments were still about ordinary things. She said we did not have to do this, in a way we could not come back from. That 12 years deserved a conversation, that she knew I was hurt and did not want me making permanent decisions from a temporary wound. I let her finish, because interrupting would have made it seem like I needed to defend the decision. I did not. When softness did not move me, she switched to disappointment. She said she never expected me to become this cold. She said filing without warning was beneath the man she thought she knew. That almost made me smile, not because it was funny, but because there was something strange about hearing a woman who had been planning her exit accuse me of moving too quietly. I told her all communication would go through Renee's office from that point forward. Tasha's face tightened. The softness drained out of her eyes, and the polished consultant stepped into the kitchen where my wife had been standing a moment earlier. "You know this could get complicated," she said. "Your businesses, your properties, all these little structures you never fully explained to me. A judge might not like how hidden everything looks." I set my cup down carefully. "Then your attorney can ask Renee for the documents." That was all I gave her. No anger, no lecture, no confession, no open door for her to step through and turn the conversation into something emotional. She wanted me to defend myself because defense would reveal what I cared about protecting. I had sat across from enough negotiators to know that trick. Tasha waited for more, and when more did not come, she opened the envelope. I watched her read the first page, then the second, then the notice that temporary financial communication would be handled through counsel. Her thumb pressed into the paper hard enough to bend the corner. "You think moving first makes you powerful?" she asked. I looked at her and said, "No, I think being prepared does." That sentence landed harder than I expected, not because it was cruel, but because it told her the version of me she had been managing was gone. She tried one last angle, and this time she did not bother hiding Grant behind careful language. She said some people understood opportunity when it appeared, and some people spent their lives resenting the ones brave enough to take it. She said I had made her feel trapped in a life that was always almost enough but never impressive. I listened to that, too. I listened because every sentence was helping me bury the last illusion that this was only a mistake she had fallen into. When she finished, I picked up my keys from the counter and told her she could stay in the house while the attorneys worked through temporary terms. I had already moved what I needed to a condo near West Midtown, one she did not know I owned, because she had never cared enough to ask what I kept separate from the life she photographed. I left before she could turn the conversation into a scene. In the driveway, I heard the front door open behind me, but she did not call my name. By the time I reached the corner, my phone buzzed once with a message from Renee. Grant's counsel confirmed attendance. Thursday, 10 a.m. I looked at it at the red light and placed the phone back in the console. At the house, Tasha must have called Grant almost immediately, because Renee forwarded me a note less than an hour later saying his office had suddenly become aggressive about the meeting being moved up. That told me panic was traveling faster than confidence now. Later, Curtis sent me a screenshot from a development contact who said Grant was trying to find out who really controlled Bennett Harbor Holdings. Under it was one line Grant had apparently said loud enough for the wrong person to hear. "I don't know who Bennett Harbor really answers to, but somebody just put their foot on my throat." Thursday morning came in bright and cold, the kind of Atlanta morning that made glass buildings look sharper than they had any right to look. The meeting was held in Renee's conference room on the 23rd floor, not at Grant's office, not at a restaurant, not anywhere he could control the temperature of the room. That was Renee's choice, and I understood it the second I walked in. The table was long, the chairs were low-backed, the windows looked out over half the city, and every folder had been placed with the kind of quiet precision that told people nothing in that room was accidental. I arrived 15 minutes early. Renee was already there, reading through a stack of documents with a pen in her hand and no emotion on her face. She looked up once and said, "Let him talk first." I nodded because I had already learned that men like Grant gave away more when they believed the room belonged to them. Grant arrived with his lawyer at exactly 10, which told me he was still trying to perform control. Tasha came in behind them wearing a navy dress and a face that looked carefully built in the mirror. She glanced at me once, then away, as if looking too long might force her to remember I was not supposed to be in both parts of her life at the same time. Grant's lawyer, a compact man named Aldridge, carried himself like someone used to cleaning up problems created by louder clients. Grant shook Renee's hand, then mine, and gave me a tight smile that did not reach anything real. He sat across from me, opened a leather folder, and began speaking before anyone had asked him to. He said Harbor Yard was too important to be slowed by personal conflict. He said recent domestic developments should not interfere with a project involving investors, city expectations, and community promises. He did not say my wife's name. He did not say affair. He did not say betrayal. He wrapped everything in business language, because business language was where guilty men went to hide personal mess. Renee let him go for almost 6 minutes. I watched Tasha while he talked. Her hands were folded on the table, one thumb moving slowly over the other, the smallest sign of strain in an otherwise polished woman. Grant spoke about revised terms, accelerated approvals, clean public messaging, and the need for Bennett Harbor Holdings to act reasonably. He kept glancing at me like I was a witness to something above my level, a husband dragged into a business room because his divorce had created inconvenience. At one point he said, "Malcolm, I respect that this is difficult, but we all have to understand where the real stakes are." Tasha's eyes lowered when he said my name. That was the first crack. Not big enough for anyone else to notice, maybe, but enough for me. She was realizing Grant was speaking to me with the same casual superiority she had used at home, and for the first time, she was not sure the floor would hold under it. When Grant finished, Renee closed the folder in front of her and rested both hands on top of it. She did not raise her voice. She did not lean forward. She simply looked at Aldridge first, because serious lawyers speak to the person in the room who will understand the danger fastest. "Before we address Mr. Ellis's proposed revisions," she said, "we need to correct the assumption this conversation appears to be operating under." Grant shifted slightly in his chair. Renee opened the first folder and slid one document toward Aldridge, not Grant. "Bennett Harbor Holdings is not an outside obstacle to Harbor Yard. It is the controlling landholder for Parcel C, the bridge financing approval party for Phase 2, and the contractual gatekeeper for any material restructuring of the East Corridor." Aldridge looked down at the page. His face changed before Grant's did. That was how I knew the words had landed where they needed to land. Grant gave a short laugh, more breath than sound. "We're aware of Bennett Harbor's position," he said. Renee turned the next page. "Then you should also be aware that Malcolm Bennett is the principal authority behind Bennett Harbor Holdings." The room did not explode. Real reversals rarely sound dramatic at first. They create silence so complete that even breathing feels like an admission. Grant stared at Renee, then at the document, then at me. Tasha did not move at all. Her face went still in a way I had never seen before, not angry, not sad, not even embarrassed yet. Frozen. That was the only word for it. She was looking at the quiet husband she had called a repairman and realizing the developer she chose had been standing on my approval, my land, my financing, and my patience. I did not say anything. I did not need to. Renee continued, walking them through the control structure in clean, plain language, never using 10 words where 5 would cut deeper. Parcel C could not be transferred under Grant's proposed terms. The financing extension would not be approved while there were questions about undisclosed conflicts and improper access to non-public project information. Any attempt to pressure Bennett Harbor through public channels would trigger a formal notice to the investor board and municipal partners. Then Renee opened another folder, this one thinner, and referenced the visitor logs, the after-hours project office entries, and the timeline showing Grant's revised demands following private conversations inside my home. Tasha finally looked at me then. Her eyes held a question she had no right to ask. "How much do you know?" I looked back calmly and gave her nothing. Grant's confidence began leaving him in pieces. First his shoulders lowered, then his jaw tightened. Then he stopped looking at me and started looking only at Aldridge, because men who perform power hate the moment they have to ask professionals whether the performance is still working. Aldridge read quietly, turned one page, then another, and said they would need time to review. Renee nodded like she had expected nothing else. "You'll have until Monday," she said. "But the revised financing proposal is rejected as submitted, the land use modification is denied, and Mr. Bennett will not approve any structure that rewards undisclosed pressure tactics." Tasha whispered my name once, so softly it barely crossed the table. I heard it. I just did not answer. There was nothing left in that room that needed to be handled as a marriage. Renee waited until everyone had absorbed the rejection, then slid one final document across the table toward Aldridge. This time Grant reached for it first, but Aldridge put a hand out and stopped him. He read the first page and the color changed in his face. Renee looked at Grant and said, "There is also a governance provision your investors may want to revisit." Grant's eyes dropped to the page, and for the first time since I had known his name, He looked less like a developer and more like a man who had built his tallest promise on someone else's ground. The document showed exactly how the investor board could remove him as managing developer before the next phase began.